gathered us together because you have words for us. You have a story for us. You have a place for us. And you desire us to know more about you. Please bless our time. Open our hearts and our minds tonight that we may hear that. And we may walk away blessed. We say this in your precious name. Amen.
Jacob had 12 sons, but his favorite was Joseph. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were working in the fields. Joseph's brothers resented him, and when they saw him coming, they attacked him and threw him in a well. Then they sold their brother as a slave, took off his coat, soaked it in goat's blood, and showed it to their father, tricking him into believing a wild animal had killed Joseph. Soon after, Joseph was sold to a military official in Egypt as a servant. God helped Joseph do great work, and the official was very happy with him. Joseph was very handsome, and the official's wife tried day after day to seduce him. One day, she pressured Joseph so much that he ran out of the house, leaving his coat behind. She told everyone that he tried to force himself on her. The official was furious and threw Joseph in jail. God once again helped Joseph in all he did. And eventually he was put in charge of all the prisoners, helping run the jail. Joseph had this special ability to interpret people's dreams. One day, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, asked Joseph to interpret one of his dreams. He dreamed that 7 fat cows were eaten by 7 skinny cows, and 7 heads of healthy grain were eaten up by 7 heads of dried up grain. God helped Joseph interpret the dream. Egypt would experience 7 years of successful farming, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh was impressed and put Joseph second in charge of Egypt. During the famine, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt looking for food. When they got there, they met with Joseph, but didn't recognize him right away. When Joseph finally told them who he was, they wept because they were sorry for what they had done. Eventually, they went and got their father Jacob and brought him back to Egypt. Joseph took care of his entire family, giving them property in the best part of the land where they lived for the rest of their lives.
The story of Joseph has a great Bible story. It has some critical learnings for us as Christians, and it's a really interesting move as God is building His nation. We see the different stages that God has gone through so far in the creation of life, in the creation of Adam and Eve, and then how the corruption of people got so severe that God regretted having done that, and He wiped out everybody except Noah. He kind of started over. And then it began to fall apart again after that, and God came to Abraham and said, I am going to make you a nation that is going to be an example to the rest of the world, and they will be blessed through you. And then we see Abraham have a son, Isaac and Jacob. Actually, Isaac and Jacob and Esau. And we see Jacob and Esau kind of duke it out for blessing from their father. And we see Jacob, who was kind of a devious guy, win out in that and create a whole family of people, 12 sons, who continue in this kind of questionable behavior, selling Joseph into slavery. Now, Joseph is not his family's tree, and he begins to break that mold that this dysfunctional family has. And we heard that tonight in that song. This was about the year 1800 BC. So that's about 3,800 years ago, almost 4,000 years ago. that all of this happened. That's a while ago. So this is a map that you might want to just look at if you've got your book, you can kind of draw it. The top color here, the purple color, is Jacob coming to Canaan. Jacob and his family coming and establishing themselves in that part of Canaan. And then we see in the green arrow where Joseph is picked up by this caravan and taken into slavery down in Egypt. And then we see the red arrow as Jacob's children, Joseph's brothers, go back and forth between Egypt, where they went to get food, and their father, and going back home. So they kind of go back and forth there. So you can tell what part of this world this is in, kind of where modern day Israel is, and still parts of Egypt. So 4 things I just want to touch on tonight, beyond just the timeline and the geography. The topics of dreams, and then some topics that, if you're talking to your kids about this, you might want to touch base. These would be great discussion topics for a family to have. We start out with dreams. Pharaoh has a dream, and that dream is not interpreted by... There we go. I keep trying to push that button. Pharaoh has his dream, and it's not interpreted well by his wise men around him, and Joseph does that. Dreams are an important part of how this culture believes they connect with God and with the mysterious and with understanding the future and understanding the present with them. Can you think of any other instances in this era or later in the Bible that dreams are important? There's a whole series of dreams that are important in this era. In fact, when Joseph's in jail. And actually, just to jump ahead here, Joseph's dreams about 7 cows and 7 shares. There's 7 pieces of wheat, and then he's able to interpret this dream and make sense of it. But there's an important lesson here about how dreams seem to guide major decisions of our leaders. We see them here. We see them in a few other places in the Old Testament. But can you think of any dreams that are mentioned in the New Testament? What's that?
The announcement for Joseph that he was with Mary.
Good, very good. Yes, an angel comes to Joseph and says, "Hey, don't divorce Mary. She's supposed to be pregnant." Yeah, that's a great one. Makes a major departure.
There's also the one with Joseph going to Egypt, or telling him to take Jesus down to Egypt.
Yes, when they're ready to go back to, they're ready to leave, they're told to go kind of the back way because Herod's looking for him. Yes. Another interesting one that gets overlooked, because I don't think it's in all the Gospels, it's in Matthew, but it is at the court trial of Jesus, when he's standing there with Pilate. Remember his wife? His wife comes to him and says, "Hey, leave this guy alone. I had this terrible dream. He's going to bring us suffering." And Pilate, of course, doesn't do that. And so this woman is now Saint Claudia. I think she's an Eastern Orthodox saint, but they turned her into a saint for having this type of dream. So dreams are an important part of kind of understanding how the world works. We've already discounted that in our Western world today, but we can't discount that from what we saw back then. Here's some topics that I just want to touch base with you and want to encourage you to look at. The first is the concept of favoritism. We see favoritism tonight, don't we, in Jacob's treatment of Joseph. And what does it cause? Pain and suffering, doesn't it? Favoritism is spoken about in Scripture very specifically in James, but if you show favoritism, you sin and you are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. It's clear and pretty powerful. And then in Romans, we see, be devoted to one another and love and honor one another above yourself. Favoritism or bias or discrimination are all part of the same stuff. And if we allow ourselves to do that, we cause pain and suffering. And in the case of Joseph, his brothers betray him, throw into a well, and sell him off as dead. If you were sold into slavery, you were considered dead by your family. So I think if you're working through these books with your children, either of these, I think a discussion about favoritism and how easy it is to favor one person over another in unfair ways would be an interesting discussion to have with them. And this is a great example of the consequences of that. Next topic to touch on is pride and humility. God opposes the proud, gives grace to the humble. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. And the reward for being humble is a fear of the Lord and riches and honor and life. Humility is a real asset. And humility is difficult, isn't it? Well, for some of us, it's difficult for me, okay? It's my problem. Humility is a difficult thing for us, and sometimes, even when we think we're very humble, we're just being presumptuous about our humility. However, great leaders are the most humble ones. Jim Collins, in his book, Good to Great, talks about level 5 leaders, and those are the ones who delegate things away and empower other people to get all the credit, and who are very humble as people. Those are the great leaders. And we're living in a culture increasingly that doesn't understand that does not honor humility, but honors power. We increasingly look like the Roman Empire, where in those times it was all about who had the most power. But Christianity is about the power of humility and service. So another good topic to talk to your kids about. Actually, hit the next slide there. Joseph got this coat from his dad, and was probably bragging about it, and it had all kinds of consequences. His brothers did not like that. The next big topic I'd like to suggest we want to look at is the concept of revenge. Revenge is a part of our culture, and it's certainly a part of your kids' culture. How many of us love seeing the Death Star explode at the end of Star Wars? How many of us love that great Christmas movie? What's the name of it? With Bruce Willis. Die Hard. Yes. And at the end, all the bad guys get blown. I mean, all the guys get killed in these movies, and we're all like, we're all with that. Well, there's this great sense of unresolved angst until the bad guys get blown up and we get our revenge. We are just conditioned that way. Is that part of our Christian faith? Of course not. Jesus says, love your enemies. Don't celebrate their demise. But our kids are conditioned from a very early age, as are we, to be celebrating revenge. Joseph could have taken revenge on his brothers, but he didn't. Revenge is something that destroys community, destroys relationships. And instead of taking revenge on his family, he forgave them. And they didn't even believe it, because after Jacob died, they got together and said, "Oh, okay, now he's going to come after us. Now that Dad's gone." And then they went and they lied to it and said, "Hey, Dad said don't hurt us." And Joseph said, "I never was going to. I forgave you." And those are the people that founded the great nation that became Israel, the Jews in Egypt. People who were living in that forgiveness. Very powerful piece of who we are that we forget about. So those are some topics that you might bring to your kids and discuss as a family. Would you open your, if you've got your study guide, thank you. Big word there for me. To page 36. We're going to listen to Randy Frazee tonight.
This is my story, but most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did.
Prison is a hard place to find yourself in. It's one thing if you did something wrong to get there. It's another thing altogether if you're there as a victim versus an actual criminal, particularly if your conviction was sponsored by the members of your own family. Well, this is precisely the place that a young man named Joseph found himself in. We're introduced to him at the age of 17. He is the son of Jacob, the grandson of Isaac, and the great-grandson of Abraham. He's a part of this great nation that God in the upper story is slowly building to reveal his presence, his power, and his plan to get all people back. But this family didn't function as one who was going to bring us back into a relationship with God. They could barely get along with each other. Studies show us that firearms in the home are almost always either intentionally or accidentally used on family members versus perpetrators. The same is true for the weaponry of poor character. The handgun of lies and the shotgun of deception were used almost exclusively on every member of Joseph's family, particularly young Joseph. You see, of the 12 brothers, Joseph was Dad's favorite. He even sported a coat of many colors that his dad gave him and left his brothers feeling cold-hearted towards him. To make matters worse, Joseph had several dreams that he believed came from God, where at the end of the dream, all of his brothers were bowing down to him. In his innocence, he shared those dreams with his brothers. His brothers, in turn, declared their little brother their worst nightmare. One day, Daddy Jacob sent Joseph out in the field to fetch his brothers, who were tending to the sheep. They roughed up Joseph and then threw him into a pit. And over lunch, they made the decision to sell their younger brother to a band of gypsies on their way to Egypt. Joseph must have been frightened out of his mind. Once in Egypt, he's sold as a slave to serve in the house of Potiphar, the captain of the guard for the mighty Pharaoh. Then there's this surprising sentence that just appears in the story. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Even though God allowed his brothers to abuse him, God is now prospering him. With God's help, Joseph quickly rises and is put in charge of Potiphar's entire house. But then another twist. Another bomb drops. We are told that Joseph was well-built and handsome, and that Potiphar's wife made repeated advancements on Joseph, but he does the right thing and he refuses her. Well, one day she tells her husband that Joseph made an advance on her and she resisted. Joseph is put in prison. up and down like a seesaw. But the next thing we know, he's back up again. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. God again allowed for an unjust attack on Joseph and allowed him to go to prison. Yet once in prison, Joseph immediately gains favor and is put in charge of the prison. And one of the things that God did for Joseph was to give him the ability to interpret dreams. The story tells us that he's in prison for about 2 years when he gets a call from Pharaoh, the main dude, to come and interpret this dream he keeps having. Well, Joseph interprets the dream. Basically, he tells Pharaoh there's going to be 7 years of a bumper crop, or lots of food, and then there will be 7 years of famine, no food at all. You know, it's really helpful to know this. Genesis 41:46 tells us that Pharaoh believes him and puts him second in command over all of Egypt to lead. He's now 30 years old. 7 years of harvest come, and Joseph stores up food to get them through the 7 years of famine. No other nation or people group knows what's coming. At the end of the first 7 years, the 7 years of famine begins, but under Joseph's leadership, they are prepared. Now the famine is affecting everyone, everywhere, including his father and his brothers back in Canaan. Jacob, Joe's dad, sends his sons to Egypt to get some food so they don't die. When they arrive in Egypt, they bow down before the second in command of all of Egypt, their punk brother Joseph, even though they didn't recognize him. Joseph is now 39 years old. 22 years has passed since he was sold down the river, thrown under the bus by his brothers. 22 years passed before the dream he dreamed as a teenage boy came true. After several emotional encounters, Joseph finally reveals his identity to his brothers. Here's what Joseph had to say to them in the story. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." What Joseph's brothers did to him in the lower story was completely wrong and had lifelong consequences of pain and guilt and depression. As a matter of fact, they could never really ever forgive themselves. But God used their sin-filled jealousy to accomplish his overall purpose, his upper story plan, which requires Israel to survive the famine. You see, somewhere in this journey, Joseph captured this, and very few people ever do. This is what enabled Joseph to process all the junk of his brothers and forgive them. Joseph was able to forgive his brothers for what they did to him in the lower story because he captured God's upper story plan. And that's huge. Some of you might think, wouldn't it have been easier for God to use his influence to recommend Joseph for the job instead of making him go through 22 years of struggle? Well, those 22 years of up and down struggles molded Joseph into the kind of man who could do what he did with integrity. Those 22 years gave Joseph an opportunity to see God's hand in life's most hopeless circumstances and situations, and to learn to trust in God completely. Joseph, out of his position of power, moves his entire family to Egypt and gives them the fertile land of Goshen. The story tells us that when his dad was getting close to Egypt, Joseph went out in his chariot to meet him. Here's what the story says. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Joseph went on to be 110 years old. Yes, he had 22 tough years, but he ended up with 71 really great ones. ones, and how rich it must have been to know that he was used by God to save Israel and to move God's upper story plan further toward completion. You know, the story is likely being rewritten for your life. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This promise of God tells us that if we love God and align our lives to his upper story purposes, everything in our lives, the ups and the downs, the mountaintops and the valleys, the highs and the hurts, the raises and the rejections, the good and the bad, are all working together to accomplish good. So be patient. Trust God. Let him mold you during the difficult seasons to equip you for the assignment ahead. You may be in a prison cell right now, either real or figuratively speaking. But if you align your life to God, your story isn't finished.
Leads you into blessing. Really? What if your lower story really sucks? Let's unpack some of that tonight. Page 36. Joseph was his dad's favorite. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, right? God showed him blank kindness. He granted him favor with his prison warden. It was to blank lives that God sent me ahead of you. To save lives. And let God blank you during the difficult seasons to equip you for the assignment ahead. Mold, yeah, the word was that Gary used up there was mold. Good, let's go to page 32 here. Why did Joseph's brothers want to get rid of him? You say A and B?
B.
And you say B? I'm afraid the answer book says B there, I can't, but I think the coat of many colors was a indicator of favoritism that just set the stage for them when he pushed them over the edge with his dreams. What position of authority was Joseph given by Pharaoh?
D. Everything.
E, you said? D. Yes, D. All of it. Yes. Second in command, in charge of grain, and in charge of distribution. When his brothers came to Egypt, what was Joseph's accusation against them?
He called them spies.
He called them spies, yeah. He was so obnoxious, wasn't he? But just got to keep them off kilter. What was God's promise to Jacob in sending him down to Egypt?
A.
I will make you a great nation. Right? Page 37 here. What part of Randy's teaching encouraged or challenged you the most? Mary?
Joseph forgiving his brothers for their betrayal. But that kind of forgiveness is just absolutely amazing. You see families fall apart for so much less than that. And he understood. He rose above it.
He really truly did forgive them. And again, going back to what I said earlier, when their father died, he could have, Michael Corleone, after their mother died, took care of Fredo. You remember that movie? But yeah, Joseph, he didn't harbor that hatred. What else? Anybody else see something that inspired them? George?
Whatever is going on in the lower story, God is watching over us and taking care of us. If
Yeah.
we were like Joseph and we followed God's word or God's plan as best we can in the lower story, God will bless us and make things right.
So, upper story, lower story. The lower story is what we live in day to day. Joseph was in the lower story in prison. He's sold into slavery. He's accused of forcing himself on this woman. The upper story is that God has plans to save the people of this region. God has plans to not let that little band of his chosen people in Jacob die and disappear and not have the promise of creating this great nation. So God has an upper story that we can't see while we're stuck in the lower story, worrying about it. And what you're saying, George, I think, and to paraphrase you, is when we trust there is a good upper story, that God really is at work, and even though our story may just stink right now, that God has blessings for us.
We cannot have the patience to wait on that
Oh.
story to occur.
We don't have patience, boy. Amen to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Or we just refuse to see what God's ultimate plan is.
Yeah, because we want the good plan. And we want to kind of be gods, our own, in charge of our own plan, people. Which is another way of saying we want to be gods. As you read the story of Joseph, what part was the most difficult for you to embrace, and what gave you the most encouragement? What was hard about it?
To me, it's really a very, very dysfunctional family for them to do what they did to Joseph. And what gave the most encouragement is that he was able to accept it and forgive because he had that faith in God to do what his life led his life lead out to work.
But it was just a hugely dysfunctional family. You know, anytime you get 9 brothers to conspire together to kill their brother and then to tell their father for the next 20 plus years, it didn't happen. That's horrible. Yes. Had Joseph continued as a part of that family at the young age of 17, he probably would have acquired those same characteristics. So he broke out of that and became much different.
But more people would have died during that 7 years of famine. Because nobody would have known it was coming, wouldn't have prepared.
Yeah. Yeah, there are all kinds of stories throughout history about how weather has just decimated entire populations. In fact, I just came to my mind as you said that. The whole Anasazi population, the American Indians down in Colorado, Pueblo and that Mesa Verde, that area, there was this big thriving population there. And then there was a drought for probably 10 years. And they just all disappeared. The entire place disappeared. So yeah, they could have just killed everybody in that whole region. And God had a plan for his own special people.
You even have another one, the potato famine in Ireland that
Yeah.
brought so many people to the United States.
Potato famine, yeah. So God was definitely at work. Anybody else? Anybody else? Here's something that was difficult to embrace or that was encouraging.
Well, the lies are the most discouraging.
Yeah. Tell me about that. The lies.
Everybody's constantly lying to each other, and all the bad stuff really comes out of those lies. Even Potiphar's wife, lying
Yeah. Good point. Yeah, and when Joseph was in prison, one of the people in prison promises to tell, I forget how this was, maybe somebody else read it more recently, promises to tell Pharaoh that he's still in there and has been forgotten about, and just doesn't do it. Just kind
Was
of
there a
lie.
chef and
Chef and
a baker?
food taster or something.
Cupbearer.
Cupbearer, that's right. Thank you, G, that's right, yes. Yeah, one of them, I think it's bakery gets yeah. Yeah, lies. It just amazes me. I mean, these are kind of seedy, rotten people in a lot of ways, and yet this is the nation that God creates out of. These are the people that become the nation He creates. Wow, gives me great hope. Romans 8:28, all things work for good for those who believe and who have been called to his purpose. You know that in all things God works for the good of all those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. How does the promise of this verse encourage you in some of your current circumstances? This is a great verse to hang on to, isn't it? How does this encourage you?
I have used that throughout decades of my life because what's going on, it gives me hope and just to keep on keeping on.
Gives you the power and the energy just to hang in there and to hold on. Good.
Because sometimes when bad things happen, we question why they happen, but we know that there is a purpose that God has for us in our lifetimes. And like I say, we lose that patience. We don't have the patience sometimes to wait for that purpose, but sometimes over a period of time, we look back and say, well, that was a changing point in my life. And that's what made me who I am today, because of that, God's glory is shown through it.
And I believe sometimes you may never know.
Yeah.
You just have to trust God.
You just know you went through a very painful, difficult time in life, and you don't see any reason or purpose for it, but you just got to kind of trust that there was some purpose for that happening.
And you did come through it. That's the, beauty thing.
Yeah.
You think you can, and then you do. And you know it's not by nothing that you did.
Isn't it great to live in hope like that? To know that we're, even in the worst circumstances, we are not alone. That God has plans for our lives to mean something to us or to those around us, to those that are left after us. Yeah. Anybody else?
No matter how difficult times are, and no matter how difficult people are with you, in the long end, you have to forgive.
And so tell me about that. Why do you have to forgive? I mean, you know what? I like being mad at people. I like being better than them because they did that terrible, stupid thing and I didn't. Why do I have to forgive?
Then the jealousy and the hate comes through, and the envy, and it just builds and builds into something that you can't hold on to anymore unless you forgive.
Yeah, we're called to forgive, which for the person that does some hideous, horrible thing, it just seems like we are handing them a reward for being that way. That we forgive them and they can say, well, good, I'm done, I'm fine. And we feel like we're depleted and they won all the cards. But I love what you said. We kind of take that in and it kind of builds in us and how did you say it? We can't handle it or we can't hold on to it. When we forgive, we are letting go of all that stuff that just festers in us and holds on to us and pollutes us. And I think I've used this phrase before. When you don't forgive somebody, it's like saying, I'm going to drink this poison so that you get sick. Well, that's gonna really work, isn't it? If forgiveness is this thing that we feel like we kind of throw in the towel and give up, and the truth is, we are letting go, and it's not okay. It's not okay what happened, but it is what it happened, and I forgive you, and I'm through worrying about it. I don't have to be your friend. I don't have to forget about it. But I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not going to let it, I'm not going to let it dominate my life. So forgiveness, when we're handed this command to forgive, isn't just for them, although it is. It's the way we love people. It's for the person who needs to forgive.
I went to a conference one time and dealing with customer service type things, and somebody mentioned, the speaker mentioned, when you hang on to the bad, you're letting that person or jerk or whatever you want to say live rent free in your head. Kick them out.
Yeah, live rent free in your head. I've heard that same phrase, and boy, I hate that thought, because I've had some people in my life that have just been miserable to me, and I let them live rent free in my head for a long, long time. Yeah.
But you can forget them. You can forgive. You don't have to forget, because that means you might make the same mistake again some other time.
Right. Forgive and forget is not scriptural,
Right.
and I think that that's a really good point, Mary. We don't want to just, somebody walks up and slaps you, you forgive them. But if you forget, you walk up and then they slap you again.
Yep.
How stupid are we? Just keep walking in and say, well, we need to kind of, we're going to back off here. But I forgive you.
That Jesus says we have to forgive them 7 times.
7 times 7. Yeah.
7 times
Yeah.
7.
Forgive them, not forget them. Yeah. Yeah, and that's not a real number. That 7 is the number of completion or the number of totality, and so it's totally all the time. We just need to live in a spirit of forgiveness. It's just really hard.
Or it's just a lot easier to say than it is to do.
Yeah. I really learned this talking to a friend about a year ago, and she was talking about how she, as a young woman, got divorced, and she wanted to forgive him, but she just couldn't. So she just, and then after about 5-8 years, she finally did. And it just really struck me how forgiveness, for somebody to do something terrible to you, and for you as a Christian to say, I want to forgive, or I shouldn't forgive, or people say, hey, you need to forgive, doesn't mean that on Monday they do something horrible to you, and on Tuesday you say, okay, I'm fine. It means on Tuesday you say, I hate your guts, but I'm going to commit not to hate your guts anymore, but I hate your guts. And on Wednesday it's, I hate your guts, and I'm going to commit not to hate your guts anymore, but I'm still kind of hating your guts. And by a week later, I really don't like your guts. I really don't, but I'm going to commit to not worrying about your guts. And it's a process. Forgiveness is a process, not the actual event happened. George.
The way I got past that, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because I've gone years hating people and this and that, but I finally come to the realization that if you turn them over to God, their judgment and punishment is going to be a lot worse than anything I can do for them. If I snap that guy's neck, which I'd really like to do, he's only going to suffer for a real short period of time. But if you turn him over to God,
then he really gets sad.
It's like he's going to twist in the wind for a while. And I mean, that would not be Christian thinking, but
Now that's a good revenge movie there. Yes. Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it here.
I know I'm supposed to pray for him, and I do, but I told God when I come to him, and he already knows, I'm not real happy for praying for this guy, but you said I had to do it, and I should do it, so here I am, I'm praying for him. I don't really mean it, but
Yeah, well, you know what? You got to fake it till you make it sometimes.
I still did what he said, even if I don't know.
So no, let me ask you, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, George, because I live in the same world. When you hated this guy, clearly you were very angry, and you were ready to snap his neck. And I don't hear that same visceral, deep anger. I hear anger, and I hear you don't like him, but it seems like that has faded somewhat. Is that just a function of time, or is it a function of you saying, I'm going to forgive you, I don't want to, but I'm going to, and kind of moving down that
It's kind of
road?
happened recently, not too distant future. It just gives you a certain peace that allows you to turn and walk away from it, and not, like you say, not carry that poison with you.
Yeah.
Because if he's in your head, then, it's hurting you, it's not hurting him, he's sleeping good.
Yeah, isn't that the ironic thing? He doesn't care that I hate him. He's sleeping great. I'm up all night and thinking
You
about
actually have to go and say to the
So, I'm sorry, I really didn't mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do you have to tell them that you're sorry?
Not if you can avoid them.
Yeah, I'd say that the answer to that is probably no. I mean, if I talk about you with somebody else, and I say something unflattering about you, and I have a relationship with you, I do need to come to you and say, hey, you know what? You have no idea I did this, but I did this, and would you forgive me? Because we're in a relationship. But when we have a relationship that is so broken and so difficult, and probably pushes all your buttons so you get pulled back into a really ugly place, you probably just don't need to go back to that relationship. There's not much of any upside there. So you stay there, I'll stay here. God bless you. I wish you the best. I don't want evil things to happen to you, but I don't want you in my life. And that's fair. We're just built that way. So do you need to go tell them you're sorry or ask their forgiveness? No, probably not. This forgiveness is a big thing. Now this forgiveness, probably close on this point here. Forgiveness is something that is so important to our faith, isn't it? But it's hard and it's unnatural, and we feel like we lose when we give forgiveness. And so the culture outside of Christianity that doesn't have this language, they just get it all upside down. I'm not going to forgive that person. When you look on Facebook, it's just covered with that stuff, isn't it? I don't like Facebook anymore. But people just don't do that. But you know what we do? We understand the power of forgiveness. We understand the power of freedom of forgiveness that we get, and we understand the gift of forgiveness when other people get it. And when people really, you try this with a non-Christian, forgive them and let them know what that means, they're shocked. It really changes them. This is something that makes Christians very different than the rest of the world. This is something that we can give as a gift to people who aren't in our faith, that God wants them to have, and that He will bless them with, and He will empower us to make a difference in those people's lives. And wonder what's different about us. That's a pretty cool thing we've got. Any other thoughts on forgiveness here? Any other thoughts on chapter 3, on this whole story of Joseph and what happened and what he did and what his brothers did and what God's doing? Okay. Next week, I forget what the topic is. I haven't read the chapter yet. Oh, it's right. It's the whole deliverance out of Egypt story and Passover story. It's about 15 pages or so, 14 pages. Short chapter, and a lot of stuff in there. The critical moment for God defining how He is going to truly take His millions of people enslaved and turn them into a real country, a real nation, a real group of people that follow Him. So the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you in His favor and send you out into the world to know your story in His story. God bless you. Good night.